So I'm just going to show you some suggestions of materials that I traditionally use for this process. Just use this as a jumping off point, give you some ideas. As with all things in this series, use what works for you. So this is a pre-cut watercolor paper. I'm very bad at measuring and cutting paper evenly. If you have a paper cutter, it's a little easier, but then you also tend to waste a little bit if you're trying to cut down to a smaller size. So I just went ahead and bought pre-cut paper. And so that saves having to measure it all out. You do pay a little more. This is 5x7, and it's about $7 for a pack of 25. So these are 5x8 index cards, and they don't hold water very well, obviously. They're just thin index cards. But I use these to just sketch out ideas and whatnot. So I happen to use text-based things all the time. I don't tend to go towards images very much, sometimes maps. What I find for myself to be really important is the texture of the paper and the look of the font. So I actually have a huge box here. Again, go towards what you like, what you're drawn to. There's all kinds of stuff in here. Just paper that's just colored, has different stains on it, some architectural stuff, different sizes of font, different colors, whatever you're inspired by. So, whatever catches your fancy. I'm recording this during the COVID outbreak, so going to a used bookstore may or may not be something that you can actually do. But, if you've got some old books lying around, the texture of the paper is important because you don't want to use paper that's very thick. And that leads us to adhesive. So Mod Podge, it's a liquid adhesive, works really well. A little bit more expensive, but really does a good job, is this Liquitex matte medium. And the reason I really like these two is because they're liquid. So I just brush them on using whatever brush I happen to use. And you'll want to rinse it off really well afterwards. But it helps to prevent bubbles and peeling up. I have used glue stick before, but it tends to, sometimes the edges of things can start to peel up afterwards. It's just not quite as good. And if your paper is brittle, then when you're applying the glue stick, you can end up tearing the paper and whatnot. So I would recommend going for a liquid adhesive just for ease of use. And then a good thing to know about with that is a credit card works really well, but spreading out air bubbles and stuff, I got this in a hardware store, but I have to say that the silicone ones are the best because nothing sticks to them. So you can just peel all the adhesive off afterwards. This one, everything tends to stick to it and then you can't get it off afterwards. So for smoothing, it's not quite as good. Things to make lines with. I have a Sumi ink here. This is Yatsumoto liquid Sumi ink. I got it on Amazon for $6.50 or something. It's really nice black ink, good for making lines when we get around to the line work. In terms of making lines, whatever brushes you have around, just a little water thing, but also I use things like feathers, the ends of branches work really well. Things to kind of get you interested in the textures that you're playing with. I have, you can find calligraphy pens for fairly inexpensive ones on Amazon and stuff. And so that's good for line work, and there we go, and that sort of thing. And then when we get around to color, just some suggestions. Regular old watercolors work fine. These are gouache. It's just a little different than the watercolor. And you want a little mixing tray somewhere to mix the colors together. Just whatever you've got around again. And, or here's another option. These are just pastel chalks. Some people are sensitive to, they definitely rub off on your hands. So if you don't like that, you may want to use gloves or use a paint. We're going to stay minimal on the colors. So, if you got, even one thing that's really fun is that I don't have any right now, but there are different kinds of alcohol inks or water-based inks that can be really fun to work with color. Possibility for lines is just, these are all just, graphite. You're going to want a pencil, most likely. Just grab some pencils. But charcoal, again, if you don't like stuff on your hands, charcoal is not a good way to go. But just think about, or maybe just try out, how you like making lines. I like a lot of precision in my line work, so I tend to gravitate towards something with a pointed edge, something, the very striking black ink, so I can really have a sharp edge and a sharp line. But you might like things to bleed a little bit more, be a little bit more ephemeral. Just think about what you like. And finally, just make sure you have a couple of choices of brush if you happen to be using paint. You can get them very inexpensively at, I like local places, but Michael's has them, Target has them. I would recommend, if you are using brushes, to get some bigger ones, because that will encourage you to be a little bit more bold and daring with what you're doing. When I have bigger brushes, I tend to be a little bit more loose with my work. So there you have it. Gather those things up and then we're ready to get started.